Hey, how's it going, guys? Sensus here. And it's been quite some time since we last made a video. I think the last video we actually made was a little over 2 weeks ago. And that's quite a long gap, and I do apologize for that. Part of it attributes to just real life stuff that's been going on, and another part of it attributes to just the current state of WoW PvP in general. Now, it seems that we're always talking about WoW PvP and balancing issues and all that kind of stuff. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about the current state of rogues and the current state of WoW PvP in general. Kind of consider this as sort of a constructive rant video. Now, I do plan on making a separate video that talks about what I feel Blizzard is doing right in terms of WoW PvP. But this one's going to focus on what I feel could be changed and just some of the changes that were made that don't really have any legitimate justification. Now, since Legion launched, rogues have been getting nerfed with pretty much every single hotfix, and it's turned into this kind of snowball effect. And what ended up being the straw that broke the camel's back was patch 7.1. In patch 7.1, Blizzard nerfed our agility by 10% across the board, and they nerfed our stamina by 5% for Subtlety and 15% for Outlaw and Assassination. Now, there was a recent hotfix that buffed our stamina across the board by 5%, so technically when it comes to stamina, Subtlety did not get nerfed at all, and Outlaw and Assassination only got nerfed by 10%. Now, going back to the patch 7.1 hotfix, these nerfs were put into place due to the response of Assassination dealing too much damage in PvP. So instead of Blizzard looking at Assassination by itself as a spec, they decided, hey, let's nerf every single rogue spec, even if the other two rogue specs did not need a nerf. This alone shows that this was a knee-jerk reaction, and what reinforces that point further is the reasoning behind these nerfs, which I quote, "Rogues are intended to be strong, yet vulnerable to focused fire. We feel they have too much survivability while dealing too much damage with both utility and survivability, so we're toning them down." Now my question is, what utility does an Assassination rogue have? They have Cheap Shot, they have Garrote, and they have Kidney Shot. 9 times out of 10, you're not even going to use that for CC, you're going to use that for its damage with internal bleeding. That's all they really have in terms of utility. They don't have Blind, they don't have Gouge, they don't have a lot of the other stuff that other specs have, or what they used to have back in Warlords of Draenor. Now, say for example here they weren't talking about Assassination spec and they were talking about Outlaw and Subtlety. Either way you look at it, it's invalid because Outlaw and Subtlety were already falling behind in terms of representation on the 3v3 ladder and 2v2 ladder, just due to the fact that they weren't able to put out enough pressure to really compete with Assassination, because so far in Legion, it doesn't matter how much CC you put out, it just depends, okay, how much damage can I put out? It's pretty much a PvE race nowadays. It's not really so much, okay, let's set up a kill on this guy while CCing this guy and cross CCing this guy. Let's just Mongo down whoever we can and pop all our CDs on somebody and hopefully get a kill. That's pretty much how Legion's been working. I mean, right now, the top comps are all melee cleaves. You have Vanguard's cleave, which is Ret DK. You have Walking Dead cleave, which is DK Windwalker Monk. So you just have all these straight up Mongo melee cleaves dominating the PvP ladder because they could just Mongo down a target without doing much else. Now let's take another look at the reasoning behind these nerfs. Rogues are intended to be strong, yet vulnerable to focused fire. What this says to me is that rogues are supposed to be glass cannons, meaning they're supposed to be able to put out a lot of damage, but be vulnerable to taking damage. For any of you guys that were around back in Cataclysm, Frosty K's kind of had this whole glass cannon thing going on. They were able to put out a ton of damage, but they were really squishy. Now, right now in Legion for rogues, they're not glass cannons whatsoever. They're just essentially glass cannons without the cannon. So we're essentially tissue paper with a wet noodle. We take a lot of damage and we don't put out a lot of damage. And that's pretty much where we're sitting right now. As a rogue, my 5 and 6 point eviscerates deal less damage than 1 tick of a Windwalker Monk's Fist of Fury. And that's a problem. That should not be like that. For any of you that have been running 3s since 7.1 hit, you would have noticed that you're seeing less and less rogues and more Windwalker Monks running with rogue style comps like, say, a Rogue Mage Paladin, Rogue Mage Priest. Instead, you now have Windwalker Mage Priest, Windwalker Mage Paladin. And that's because Windwalker Monks pretty much do the same things that a rogue can do, but better. They have more mobility, higher damage, higher burst, and more utility. So right now people are thinking, why would you run with a rogue when you can run with a Feral Druid or a Windwalker Monk and have more success? Now I want to take a moment to just talk about Subtlety as a spec in general. So in Legion, it was designed to have amazing mobility, good utility, and good consistent damage. Now on paper that sounds like a good idea, but in execution it kind of falls behind. So right now the current Legion meta relies extremely heavily on burst, and that's one big thing that Subtlety lacks. It doesn't exactly have a real burst ability. With the 3 charge Shadow Dance, you have that consistent damage, but that's really all you have. You don't exactly have that 1 charge Shadow Dance that you used to have back in WoW in previous expansions that was meant to be a high damaging ability that you could use to set up kills. Now it's pretty much, okay, let me spam Shadow Strike into my target and hopefully I don't run out of Shadow Dance charges before my target dies. I don't like how Subtlety relies so heavily on just having Shadow Dance charges, because once you're out of Shadow Dance charges, that's pretty much it. You're just poking your target with backstab at that point, and I think that's just bad design in general. Ideally, I feel that they should revert Subtlety back to how it worked in WoD, where you have 1 charge of Shadow Dance on a 1 minute cooldown that's used to set up kills and deal a lot of damage to your target, as well as buff the damage that backstab does, so you're not just poking your target when Shadow Dance is down. One other issue that I have with Subtlety is not in the spec itself, but in the artifact weapon trait Akarri Soul. So currently Akarri Soul breaks CC. So say for example you're on a target and you and your teammates want to switch, and say you're running with a mage and they want to poly the current target that you're on, they're going to have to wait a couple seconds before they could actually poly that target. Otherwise, Akarri Soul is going to break it. Blizzard really needs to make it so that Akarri Soul immediately stops hitting a target that has breakable CC on them. Now let's move on and talk about some of the issues I have with PvP in general, starting out with World PvP. In World PvP, your stats aren't normalized to a structured PvP level, so you're not going to be able to 1v1 somebody on the same playing field as you would if you were to 1v1 them in an arena or a BG. To put it in Helinkus terms, anything goes in World PvP. Now that's all fine and good, but the issue with that is that it affects duels as well. With Legion, Blizzard kind of unintentionally killed the dueling scene. You can't really 1v1 somebody on a fair playing field at the moment in Legion, because say somebody else has 2 legendaries and you don't have any legendaries, as long as they're half decent, they're going to win every single time, just because they simply outgear you. Now that actually brings me to my next point. Blizzard made it so in Legion, it doesn't really matter if you have a full set of PvP gear. All that matters in PvP is your eye level. So say for example you have an 880 eye level and your opponent has a full set of 840 PvP gear. Even if you have a bunch of random PvE pieces on your character, you'll be able to outperform your opponent, because like I said, all that matters in PvP in Legion currently is eye level. Now I see why they did this. They wanted to make it so gear itself didn't have as big of an impact on PvP as it has in the past, but at the same time they're quote-unquote encouraging PvPers to do PvE in order to try to get that slight gear advantage. Now some may view this as a good thing. You could say, oh, you get to experience more of the game, you get to have fun in PvE. But as a PvPer, I don't want to have to do PvE in order to get an advantage in PvP. Now yes, you can spam rated arenas and rated battlegrounds in order to get similar eye level pieces that you can get from doing PvE. But it's a lot easier to just queue up for a Mythic Plus and try to get gear from doing that than it would be to get a team together and spam queue rated arenas or rated battlegrounds until maybe RNGesus actually smiles upon you and gives you a piece of good gear. And that's another thing I have a problem with. You shouldn't have to rely on RNG in order to get PvP gear. That shouldn't be a thing. In previous expansions, you were able to tell ahead of time how long it was going to take you to get your full set of PvP gear, just by looking at your current rating and how many conquest points you were going to be able to spend the next week. Now it's pretty much impossible to know, because it's all based around RNG. Now one last thing I wanted to touch on before I ended this rant is that we haven't seen a new battleground in nearly 4 years. 4 years, guys. That was the last time we actually saw a new battleground enter the game. Now Blizzard said this was due to the fact there's already too many battlegrounds in the game currently, and that they would have to sift some out in order to implement new ones. Personally, I disagree with this. I don't feel that they need to sift anything out. I think they could just implement new battlegrounds and keep the current ones they have. They could even implement new game types and use the current maps that they have, which is what it seems that they're going to be doing with the whole PvP brawl system coming in patch 7.2. And we're going to talk more about that in my compliments video. This was just a way for me to get my frustrations out and let you guys know how I feel about the current state of the game. Let me know in the comments if you agree, if you disagree with what I said. And take everything I said with a grain of salt. These were just my opinions and what I feel Blizzard could do to just improve the game as a whole. Just to be clear, I didn't make this video to bash Blizzard at all. I just did it to get my concerns out there as someone who's been playing the game for years and who's been passionate about the game for years and just wants to see the game make improvements for everyone's sake. If you made it this far, you're the real MVP. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.